You paid for something this morning without touching money. Maybe a coffee. You tapped a piece of glass against a piece of plastic, a number moved somewhere you have never been, and a stranger handed you a cup. You have a word for the place that number lives. You have said it your whole life. You probably said it this morning. And you have never once looked at it. It isn't a building. It was never a building. A table. Here's the picture you have, and it's a reasonable one. A bank is a building. Marble, or something doing an impression of marble. Heavy doors. A vault somewhere underneath with your name on a list inside it. Something that was always there and was always this big. Now here's the Greek word for it, trapeza. It means table. Not comes from table, means it. The literal sense is four-footed. Tetra, four, pizza, foot. The thing in your kitchen. A man who sat at one was a trapezites. The man of the table. That is the ordinary Greek word for a banker, and it is the word their lawyers used in court. And Greece never gave it up. The institution that runs the Greek money supply today, the central bank, the one that prints the euros in Athens, is called Trapeza tis Ellados. A modern Greek, in a modern city, walks into a building called the table. The marble came later. The table came first. And almost everything you think a bank does was already happening on one. Around 350 BC, in an Athenian courtroom, a man is explaining to a jury why he chose the boring half of his inheritance. His father had died and left two businesses, a shield factory and a bank. The factory earned more, a talent a year, against the bank's 100 minae. He took the factory. The smaller income. On purpose. And this is the sentence he uses to explain himself. The bank is a business yielding a hazardous revenue from money which belongs to others. Read that again. Money which belongs to others. That is not a modern criticism of banking. That is not something we worked out after a crash, or wrote into a regulation, or learned the hard way in 2008. That is an Athenian, in public, in a speech that survived, saying it out loud 24 centuries ago. And there was nobody standing behind him. When bankers went under, and Demosthenes names them, Sosinomus, Timodemus, others, they handed over everything they owned, and that was the end of it. The risk sat exactly where that sentence puts it. On you. The numbers were not small either. When the banker Pasion died, he had around 20 talents of property and more than 50 talents out on loan at interest. 11 of those talents were other people's deposits. Working somewhere else. Not in the room. So picture what you would actually have to do to use one of these. You walk down to the harbor at Piraeus carrying everything you own in silver. You find a table, you hand it to a man, and there is no contract. Isocrates told a jury that agreements with bankers were made without witnesses, which was precisely why suing one was so hard. No signature, no clerk, no receipt. Nothing behind the table but the man sitting at it. That should not work. That should be the most fragile arrangement in the ancient world. One rumor, one bad season, and it's gone. And sometimes it was gone, for Sosinomus and Timodemus and everyone else who ended up handing over the lot. So here is how you know it worked anyway. Look at who was allowed to sit at the table. Pasion started as a slave. The men who owned him, Antisthenes and Archestratus, were themselves the bankers. He was property inside the business. And what Demosthenes says about him is that he gave proof to the bankers who were his masters that he was a good man and an honest, and so won their confidence. He was freed. He ended up running the bank, then owning it. By the end, he was one of the richest men in Athens, 1,000 shields handed to the city, and 5 separate years spent paying for a warship. And then Athens did something it almost never did for anybody. It passed a decree making him a citizen. Him and his descendants. Then his own former slave, a man called Phormio, did the entire thing again. 2 men crossed. The same city and the same tables ran on thousands who never did. Now the part that makes this more than a good story. A man named Lycon from Heraclea is about to sail for Libya. Before he goes, he settles up at Pasion's bank and leaves an instruction on the books. On the voyage, he is killed by pirates. The instruction outlives him. Here is the line, quoted in court. Lycon the Heracleote, 1,640 drachmae, to be paid to Cephisiades. Archibiades of Lamptrae will identify Cephisiades. Look at what is in that line. A payment to a third party the bank has never met. Held on the books. Carried out after the account holder is dead. And a named human being attached to the record whose entire job is to walk in and confirm this is the right man. That is identity verification. Written down in the 4th century BC. And there is a reason citizenship mattered so much to men like this. A non-citizen could not own land in Athens, which meant a foreign banker could not foreclose on any. His loan book was crippled at exactly the point where a modern bank is strongest. Phormio didn't want citizenship as an honor. He needed it to collect. Because with no registry and no enforcement, the only thing a man could put up was that he had never once failed to pay. Which is why someone who arrived owning nothing could outcompete men who were born owning everything. Tomorrow morning you'll tap the glass again and the number will move, and behind it there will be insurance and charters and regulators and a building with a vault in it. All of that is scaffolding. It was built around the one thing the Greeks already had and could never write down, a man at a table, and whether his word was good. They didn't have a word for the building. They just had the table.